I'm just going to kind of quick tell you a little bit about peak oil. Back in the 80s, I wrote about all the world predictions for the actual amount of oil we had looked like we would peak around the year 2000. In fact, the Office of Technical Assessment of Congress said the same thing. So we've known this for a long time, but various people would say, oh, no, that's not true. The U.S. Geological Survey would say we have enough oil to 2050 before we peak. And of course, all the Arab countries reported these large deposits because the larger their deposit, the higher their quota was in OPEC. So we have all these inflated numbers. And only 2 months ago, a Swedish study came out saying that the world supply of oil has been overestimated by 80%. Okay? But that was never a secret to the industry or to people in government. We've known this for a long time. We know this because of M. King Hubbert. He, back in 1956, predicted that the United States would peak in oil production in 1970. And everybody said, you're smoking something. You're crazy. There's no way. We got 100 years worth of oil. Why are you making all this trouble? He was a petrogeologist. He said, look, I've been looking at all the data, and this is what it's going to be. And they said, yeah. And they dismissed him. In July 1970, the United States peaked in oil production, which meant we no longer could produce as much as we needed. So, in other words, all the wells were running flat out after that point. Now, Hubbard also made a prediction about the world peak of oil. And he said that was going to happen sometime around the year 2000. But remember, he's making these predictions back in the 60s. His student, Kenneth DeFaze, has carried his work forward and has written a book called Hubbert's Peak, which came out a few years ago. And he said, taking the same analysis that Hubbert used and plugging in all the numbers up to current times, that oil would peak, depending on how hot economies were, between sometime mid-2003 and 2006. And now that's been further refined to, he says conservatively, early next year in 2004. It actually has already happened. And you've all watched it happen. A few months ago, OPEC cut back oil production 3%. Not exactly your big slash, but they're about a third of the oil production of the world. So that's 1% of the oil production of the world was off the market. And the price went from $22 a barrel to $28 a barrel, where it more or less sits today. And the reason why the Arabs did that, why OPEC did that, was to see if we had peaked in oil production. Because if we haven't, somebody else would step up production and fill in the 1% that was missing. And no one has. So I want you to understand the importance of this. This does not mean that next year we run out of oil. What it means is we no longer can produce as much oil as everyone in the world wants. So what does that mean? You're the petrochemical company of Gabon, Africa, and you order up oil. And they say, sorry, we can't deliver all that you want. And they go, what do you mean? We got a country to run here. We got fertilizer to make. We got diesel fuel for our trucks. We got to run our cars. You can't tell us we can't buy oil. Well, sorry, we don't have enough. We really just don't quite have enough for you. Well, what do you think the government of Gabon is going to say?
Start bidding.
What if we paid a little more? Could we get enough oil? Well, that's a different story. Sure. Then the energy minister of Ghana calls him and says, what happened? We got shorted on oil this month. And of course he'll say, well, what if we paid a little more? And this starts a cycle that will never end. Okay? You will see a steady increase in the price of oil pretty much from here on out. It's being kept down right now by bookkeeping Enron-style BS to keep people from knowing just how desperate the situation is. Last year, the importation of finished gasoline in the United States went up 90%. Because, our demands keep going up and we don't have any more refineries.
How about the vast fields around the Caspian Sea, though?
That's counting all that. That's counting all that. No, but while that's being tapped, other oil fields are dropping out. So the rate of growth has stopped and is reversed. We're using 4 times more every year, increased rate, than what we find. So we're talking, and all the governments in the world know this, and they're all in denial. And believe me, denial is not a river in Egypt.
You were saying before that gasoline for cars is actually a waste byproduct. So even if the entire entire world's fleet of cars were switched to alcohol, we would still be using petroleum for plastics and fertilizers and pharmaceuticals, right? So
Really? Take a look at the changes in agriculture when we start making alcohol. And also alcohol.
can we use the cellulose for plastic uses and other?
You ever hear of rayon? That's a fabric made of cellulose.
Right.
In fact, in the early part of the century, last century, we had a movement called the chemergy movement. And everything we make from oil today, they made from plants. And really, there's nothing, no hydrocarbon that's made today that we cannot make from various carbohydrates. For instance, polylactic acid is being made by several companies right now. They make beautiful bags, look just like plain old polyethylene bags, but they rot. They're biodegradable, and they're made from alcohol and lactic acid. So we can do all this stuff. We don't need oil for almost any of the things that we use oil for today. We can use plant-based materials to do it. Sure, it'll cost a little more, but not really, because look at the subsidy we're paying for right now. And also, the cost we have today is about to end. Now, I'm going to kind of try to wrap this up pretty soon, because I said I'd try to finish by 9:30.